for the gift. Our gospel reading this morning is from Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 to 33 and 44 to 52. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour, until all of it was leavened. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all of this? They answered, yes. And he said to them, therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. May God add a blessing on the hearing and understanding of these words. Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I spent a small amount of time this week in the food pantry, and I'd like to introduce you to some of the people I met and got to hear from. Anita arrived with her paperwork in hand. It's July, and the volunteers have posted all month long in both English and Spanish that people have to bring proof of the ages of the people they are claiming in their household to receive food. Anita had her own ID for her 6 children and husband. And when Snooks asked about one other person, she pulled up a picture of that ID on her phone. I can't remember to bring my own laptop in to set up the wireless printer in my office here at church, and I know where my next meal is coming from. But Anita had it all together, so she could feed her family for another month. As I listened, she explained to me that her brother-in-law had been living with them for the last 4 months because, quote, he isn't well. I asked some more questions about whether he was physically or mentally not well, and she explained physically, but went on to share that she had a son who was mentally not well. Just because she relies on our food pantry doesn't mean she doesn't have organizational skills to manage her family and maybe other things as well. It's not what it looks like. Sandra showed up having forgotten that she had already visited the food pantry this month. But the volunteers told her they could provide a rescue bag for her, and she was grateful. Sandra was tearful as she talked to me about where she lived and how her hands hurt. But she was quick to tell me that when she wakens and her hands feel okay, she likes to go do something. She shared with me that she likes to volunteer at St. Malachy in their food program, because she can give back as well as receive food. Sandra appeared to have some mental health issues, but she wants to work when she is able. It's not what it looks like. Guadalupe and Pedro and her husband Pedro arrived to get food for themselves and 3 children under the age of 12. Pedro was in his 70s and Guadalupe was in her 60s. They were clearly raising grandchildren. Pedro hung back, not interacting with either volunteers or his wife. I don't know why. I could speculate. Pride, language barrier, something else on his mind, but I don't really know. Guadalupe was more than willing to talk to me. I was limited in that I could only speak to her in English, not her first language. I wonder what answers I might have heard had I been able to speak to her in her native language. But she confirmed that it was her 3 grandchildren, that her husband was retired, but still worked some odd jobs. When I asked about the parents of the children, she assured me they were around, but then said it was only her and Pedro in the house. When we finished our conversation, she hugged me, gave me a kiss on my cheek, and went on her way with Pedro and the food to feed their family. It's not what it looks like. 2 weeks ago, I gave a sermon about our food pantry and asked you to think about what we might do next to address why there was a need for our food pantry. About 15 of you were willing to come have a discussion about the pros and cons of some of my suggestions. Some of you were rightfully critical, in the kindest of ways, that perhaps I didn't have a good grasp of what the clientele of the food pantry was really like. Hence, my brief visit to the food pantry this week. I still don't have a good grasp, but I certainly have a better grasp. We came up with pros and cons for each of the approaches and then looked at what some of the themes that were similar in all of the areas. One of the pros in all of the approaches was to be able to empower the people visiting the food pantry. One of the cons was the sense that many of them didn't really have a desire to work or learn new skills, or perhaps they were unable to because of physical or mental illness or disabilities. But what I learned in my brief visit is that it's not always what it looks like. Our gospel reading this morning uses lots of metaphors to describe the kingdom of heaven. Seeds, yeast, treasure, merchants, and fishermen. But the message is the same. God is able to take the most unlikely things, help them to grow, and thus bring in the kingdom of heaven. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the fertile soil to help things grow, and I acknowledged that Pilgrim has planted in very good soil, but asked you to consider if it was time to add another crop. What I heard from the deliberative dialogue is that we need to nurture the seeds we have. And those seeds are found in the people that use our food pantry. We need to nurture those seeds because we are followers of Christ, who teaches us that when we nurture those seeds, we bring the kingdom of heaven. And when we do that, we are changed. The seeds are changed. And we all get to experience the kingdom of heaven. But here's the thing. It's not that the seeds need to be changed. The seeds need to be nurtured First, and I believe most importantly, we need to listen to the people who are using the pantry. Many of you could tell me stories about the people who use our pantry, and I certainly learned about some of them by asking a few questions and then listening to their responses. But there seemed to be so much more we could learn through listening to their stories that would help them to feel more empowered. Simply telling our stories and having someone listen gives each of us a sense of empowerment. Imagine if we nurture that seed of empowerment in Anita, how she might feel and how it might change her life. Instead of seeing someone dependent, maybe we could see someone who could use her organizational skills in a job to help support her family. Maybe it's not that she doesn't want to work, but that no one has ever empowered her to be able to work. Maybe Sandra can't work every day, but if she was empowered to have some place to volunteer when she felt up for it, which might give her a meal in return, she might feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. Maybe it's not what it looks like. Second, what if we nurtured the seeds of hearing their stories or offering assistance in their native language? Both Anita and Guadalupe and Pedro did not speak English as their primary language. During the summer, we are fortunate to have someone volunteering that is fluent in Spanish. But when school starts and she returns to her job as a teacher, the only person who can speak to them in their native language is our building manager, who has other responsibilities. Anita and Guadalupe were perfectly capable of sharing their stories with me, but how much more empowered might they feel if they could have spoken in their native language and I could have understood? Perhaps it's not that they don't want to share more with the volunteers, but they could better do it in their native language. Maybe it's not what it looks like. As followers of Christ, we are called to bring the kingdom of heaven now, not in the end times. These are only a couple of ways in which we can tend the seeds to bring the kingdom of heaven, and thereby be changed ourselves and offer change and growth for others. What else can we do to tend the seeds? What is preventing the seeds from growing? Maybe it's not what it looks like. Amen.